Rubia Garcia and Eugene Collins are leading a federal lawsuit challenging Louisiana's suspension of congressional primaries after the election process had already begun. Since the lawsuit was filed, a growing list of candidates, including Congressman Cleo Fields and Democratic candidates across congressional races, have joined the case. The lawsuit alleges violations of the U.S. Constitution, federal election law, and specifically the Voting Rights Act, and seeks immediate relief to restore the full May 16th ballot. And with us today, we have Rubia and Eugene. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
Good to be here, Georgia Quinn.
All right. So let me start with you, Rubia. Let's start with the most basic question. What is this lawsuit specifically asking the court to do?
Specifically, we asked the Middle District of Louisiana to implement a temporary restraining order to reinstitute the elections up to and including making sure that May 16th elections are back on the ballot. Really, we were challenging and still are. We are leaving the maps alone, but we are challenging the separation of powers issue on whether or not Governor Jeff Landry has the authority in order to suspend elections, because this is an unprecedented action where normally elections would not fall under the emergency type powers. Normally, it would be power grid failures or COVID or things that would make going to the ballot box to be hazardous for voters. And
Yeah.
ultimately, that's where we're at. We're asking them to restore basically what all the candidates have been campaigning for the entire time, and sticking with the really just focusing on his actions on suspending the elections, which has never transpired before.
What is it? And I don't know if he's stated it publicly yet, but what is his defense? What is the Landry administration's defense of having the power to not only do this, but to do this late? I know he called this an emergency, sort of emergency election powers, but that's kind of a new designation for me.
That it's a new designation for everybody. Like I said, it's a novel and first impression, what they would call in the legal sense, a first impression and novel issue. That's all. That's why we filed the lawsuit, because something like this has never happened before. And by my reading of the law in the revised statutes, that this wouldn't necessarily fall under that. Like I said, it's not a power grid failure, it's not a storm, it's not COVID-19 or anything like that. But he says that it's an emergency, and had the Secretary of State Nancy Landry declare an emergency, which he then utilized in order to implement. And the reason why he did that is because he's aware of the separation of power issues. He's aware that Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution says that the state legislatures have the authority to determine the time, places, manners of federal elections. So he had to declare an emergency in order to exercise that type of in this lawsuit. That's the
So,
only thing that I can think of.
yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see what sort of novel legal territory that the administration tries to create to justify this. Um, it's also going to be interesting because, as we talked about a little bit earlier, it would take quite an ignorant, and I mean that by the literal definition of the word, an ignorant judge to look at any of this and say that any of this is following the law. In a normal system, there would already be an injunction against these actions because all of this on its face is clearly not right. It's clearly too late. There's an election underway, but that's just sort of my soapbox. Uh, the sort of leading headline today for go ahead.
No, I was saying it's not really a soapbox, to be honest, because let's just look at some of the recent cases. Look at Alabama, and they eventually declared those maps to be unconstitutional and then added the majority seats. But the Supreme Court, utilizing Purcell in prior precedent, was like, it's too close to the election in order to upend the rules, in order to jump
Mhm.
in, because the judiciary does not normally jump in this close to an election. And it's not even close to an election. It's in the middle of one. 100,000 absentee ballots have gone out. They've been sent back, already cast. Early voting started on Saturday. We're literally in the middle of an election. So again, this is unprecedented type action that is has taken place. It's I I've been researching this since Wednesday, since the ruling came back, and Governor Landry first said that he was going to consider suspending elections. I didn't sleep. I was in Monroe campaigning all night, and going around the district out there, and my spidey senses went told me that something was nefarious. So I stayed up all night, read the opinion, started looking into pleadings. I remember reaching out to Eugene morning, and I'm like, look, we need to get the pleadings together. We need to get the attorneys on lock, and we need to have everything drafted in case he comes through. And he did. By the end of the day, he not only circumvented and signed the law of Calvin Duncan, circumventing that and eliminating his seat, but then he followed that up with the emergency executive order, basically wiping out and suspending it in literally less than 48 hours prior to early voting starting, and already when absentee ballots had already been cast. Something like this just hasn't been done before. We are literally in uncharted territory. So you're right on the money when you're saying, like, in a normal course, the TRO would have been issued, but we're not in normal times, and we are totally in unprecedented times right now. Uncharted territory.
Which is evidenced by the fact that, keep in mind, they had to issue a statement urging voters to just skip the races that will already be on your ballot. So that should tell you how haphazardly this is happening. The ballots that you will see between now all the way through Election Day will have the congressional candidates that the governor is insisting that you just skip because they won't count the ballots. Really quickly, Eugene, what is your role in all of this, and why is it important from a voter's perspective what happened to make this legal action necessary?
When you look at voters' rights, right, and you look at simply vote dilution, right, I think it falls in all of those categories, especially when you talk about voter suppression. Because when you look at these things, what you are authored in is mass confusion. So people are really confused, right? Even if you don't see the effects in this particular election, you know this, but I ain't got to explain it to you. You'll see the effects in future elections, right? You'll get the folks that look like me to say, hey, voting doesn't matter because my vote doesn't count anyway. I just saw Calvin removed. They stopped the vote after I went voted early. All of those things, right? So we have to look at this. This is a disruption in democracy. This is not in the spirit of the Constitution. This is not what the forefathers had in mind when they founded this great country. So when we start looking at things like what the governor just did, we don't believe that he had the power to do so. And that's what we're questioning of the court. Hey, let us know that the governor had the power to do this or not. And we're asking folks essentially in this lawsuit just to slow down and make sure that we understand this thing, because Rubia spoke to it. Examples we can pull from this is wholly different. And when you look at this being wholly different, we have to remember first the people and their ability and their access to this government and their right to representation. I always tell folks, a lot of tea got through in with some water up in Boston because folks have been taxed without representation, taxation without representation. And right now, Quentin, that's what this feels like. It feels like you got kings and princes and queens that are just running our government and they're not taking into account the people.
It sounds almost like what you're sort of hinting at is that this feels like them really testing whether or not they can cross a very, very important line. That this is, and not just for here in Louisiana, that like if they can do this here, what does this mean moving forward?
Just like I know, Louisiana is typically a test ground for stuff like this, right?
Unfortunately.
And see what works there, and we'll try it other places. I truly believe that if this election does not happen, we should not expect midterms. I truly believe that. I truly believe that midterms, you're going to see the same thing happen around midterms if we don't push for this election to happen. And that's a travesty. That wasn't what was intended in our Constitution. That wasn't what was intended with voter rights. You're talking about rolling back rights that happened in the 60s when we went back 40, 50 years last week. That's something that sadly no matter what we do in the moment, our children will be stuck fixing. We got to push a little harder for this, and that's why we filed that suit.
Okay, so for either of you, whoever wants to answer on this one, why is and obviously I know this, but you know the whole purpose of this is to educate voters. Why is suspending an election after voting? Why is that so dangerous? Like after ballots have been sent out to people, what is the danger of doing this late?
Go ahead. So I will say that number one, as we said in our pleadings, this runs an issue of the Supreme Court has come close to this decision and come something somewhat close to this within recent years. We saw the same thing happen in Alabama. Like I said, they went forward with what was eventually declared to be an unconstitutional map because they said, according to the Purcell principle, the judiciary does not want to jump into elections this close to an election in order to prevent this type of confusion in order to kind of in order to go on. The other concern, as we stated in our pleadings, is that something like this has already been litigated before. 26 years ago, I was still in high school, but 26 years ago in Bush v. Gore and also in Logan, there is also precedent. It opens up an opportunity for, if there is a ballot and it's a multi-ballot issue like this, and you have amendments on this ballot, you have public service commissions, you have other Senate things, but you are selecting certain things on the ballot, and you are saying we're going to count certain things, and then we're not going to count certain things. The concern is those things were deemed to be unconstitutional. You cannot, on an absentee sealed ballot, say that somebody has cast this ballot. You cannot selectively choose certain things to count and certain things to not count. So the question therefore becomes, what's going to happen to this election just in general, to anyone, to somebody who loses, if there is already precedent that says that you cannot selectively count certain things and not, which again was another argument that we made. It's at this point that, yeah, we've already been here before, and the Supreme Court has stepped in and said, we're not going to actually step in. We're going to let this play out. But then also, there is also Bush v. Gore and Logan, like I said, which says that you can't selectively choose certain things on the ballot to be counted. So therefore, what happens, and Eugene is exactly right, we're looking at if that's the case, does that invalidate this entire election altogether? Do we have to run this process literally all over again?
Yeah.
Because you said certain parts of the ballot can't be counted, which is in violation of precedent that's already in place.
Theoretically, every candidate, no matter what the result is, could sue and say that it's invalid.
Precisely.
Because of all of the uncertainty. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. What does it mean? Because I guess, the big headline all day was the expansion of the lawsuit, especially the fact that Cleo Fields was able to join as well. You have a wide swath of, I'm not sure if it's all of the midterm Democratic candidates, but I think a good chunk of the congressional candidates are all a party to it, and they're all plaintiffs. What does it mean to have all of those other candidates have joined the case?
Would you like to take this?
Yeah, I'll take it. Yeah, so Quinn, when you look at that, I mean, that particularly item, like, look at who joined the case. Basically, everybody in that field joined, right? With the exception of a couple of people that, Quinn, that lets you know that this ain't just a Lindsay, Rubia Garcia issue. This ain't just a Eugene Collins issue. This is an issue of democracy. This is an issue that affects a lot of different people. And I think when you see the number of responses we got, not just with the people on the lawsuit, right? The support in the community. This is something that people care about. Because when you start canceling the elections mid-screen, just so that you can get to a map that benefits you, man, that's nowhere near what I thought was even possible in this country, say 2 years ago, right? We're looking at things happening now that honestly people are sitting back like, hey, is that legal? Can you do this? Can that happen? Those are the questions that we're asking ourselves in 2026. And we're people that are well versed in these things, right? So imagine what the person that maybe voting for the first time, or maybe hasn't voted a lot, maybe not that engaged, but want to vote this time. Imagine what's going through their head. And those are the people that I'm really worried about. The folks that aren't as engaged as we are, want to get educated on the topic. This is totally confusing and something that, again, Quentin, I think it's going to take us years to come out of this.
I agree, and I will add, there was somebody I was reached out today by even like Republican candidates, because we invited everyone. Like, it was not, we did not want to just be like this is a Democrat issue, because it's not.
No.
And more importantly, across the entire span and spectrum, everybody that's on the ballot for the issue that we just talked about. We just talked about the fact that everybody who's on the ballot, Supreme Court, Public Service Commission, obviously not necessarily the amendments, but both Republicans and Democrats, not just the candidates, but their constituents as well. What does this mean for everybody? And certain candidates, I'll just speak on my district. I attended forums. I've met with other candidates that are on the opposite side of the aisle. Certain candidates have spent their own personal money, did not fundraise at all, and they have spent their own money to run on these particular lines. We qualified for these lines. We've put out campaign materials and the rat cards and promotions and ads and text messages and the like. And it is a bipartisan issue. It is a purple issue. It's not a red. It's not a blue. It's not just a House, a Senate. It's literally everybody that's on the ballot, because there's so much that's in the air and so much confusion. And I genuinely believe that that was the intention, to create the confusion.
No, you're especially right in bringing up the fact that, you know, while this was clearly done for partisan reasons, this had a clearly bipartisan effect. And while I don't anticipate in this environment, in this sort of tribal MAGA environment that we're in right now, that Republicans who clearly have been adversely affected by this will, you know, will make their voices known, which is a shame that they're willing to give up their own democracy just to, again, appease one person. I do hope that voters understand that, you know, for a lot of candidates and campaigns, that date that is set long ahead of time is what everything is centered around. And so, you know, every and not only that, strategies are built in around the entire ballot, right? And so there are Senate candidates that are adversely affected by the congressional campaigns being canceled. There are PSC candidates, even the constitutional amendments are affected by what you do to the congressional races. And so there are so many people who honestly, so many people and interests who should be offended by what's happening. And if we didn't live in the tribal environment that we do, again, soapbox. I don't want to keep you all too long. What, Rubia, how do you campaign right now with all of this uncertainty, without knowing whether or not, you know, what the result of May 16th is going to be, what the Secretary of State is going to do with those votes, what the validity of the May 16th vote is going to look like, when the postponed election is going to be held? How do you campaign with all of these sort of questions that are up in the air, plus you're, you know, leading this lawsuit?
What happens, whether they rule for us or against us, I'm not leaving this race. I've dedicated not just the time and the money and the support of other people, but I fundamentally ran in this race to prepare for this moment. I knew, graduating from law school last year, having focused in voting rights litigation in part, knowing that this was probably going to come to something like this. Granted, I had no way of knowing it would have come so soon, and in this fashion. But that's why immediately when the voting rights decision in Calais came back, I didn't go to sleep on Wednesday night, and I stayed up reading, and I stayed up looking up what the actions were and saying we have to take legal action of some sort, or we need to be prepared to take it. But for me, I ran because I felt like it was either take the bar, and I told you this in our first meeting, it was either run for office or take the bar. And considering this administration has been attacking the American Bar Association because they've been disbarring his attorneys for frivolous lawsuits and violations and sanctions and the like, I didn't feel like we had the time. So for me, I whether they rule against us or not, whether I have to wait longer or not, justice delayed isn't always justice denied, as the good saying goes. So for me, I'm moving forward. I never stopped campaigning. I stayed out in Monroe. I did the forum that night that you were so grateful to put on and continue. I am so thankful, and I told you this to your face. I am so thankful that you continued on with the forums and that you continue to do what you did. Bit of an interruption. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm still here. You're frozen, but I can hear you.
Okay. For me, I never stopped campaigning. We kept on going. We kept on. I came back, and even in the midst of litigation, I'm still going out. I'm still calling people. I'm still canvassing. We're still posting. We are still litigating in the midst of everything. Showed up to Calvin's thing. That was more of a personal thing and support and whatnot. But either way, anyway, I intend to go forward with this because I really genuinely believe that democracy is on the line, just like Eugene said. I genuinely believe that we are currently in the fight for the soul of this nation and that this is the fundamental groundwork of it. And just like Eugene said also, that this is the test ground for where everybody else is. Because if you take a look around, Governor Kemp took actually absolutely no time before he stepped up and started talking about suspending elections and for midterms out there. So I have no doubt whatsoever that now that this ruling has come down, that it is about to be a ripple effect in order to disenfranchise the entire South, in order to redraw these districts, in order to try to remove the majority minority seats literally across the entire South. So now more than ever, I am more resolved than ever in order to see this through the end, because I have no intention of stopping. Not just for myself, not just for my own children or my students, but for the constituents, not just of District 5, but for the entire state of Louisiana, but also the United States and every single person in the United States across the board. Because what happens here will set the stage for what happens in the months and years to come. And I'm not convinced that it will be. This is not going to be resolved even if I were to get elected tomorrow and get there. This is going to be something I'm going to have to get in Congress, and we are going to have to put legislation on the books. Absolutely, full stop, no gerrymandering across the board. There needs to be federal legislation, not just removing money from politics, but gerrymandering, just period, on the books. It has to stop. It has to stop now, not by Republicans, not by Democrats. Period, point blank, end of story. It needs to be stopped.
And I almost think that that's going to be a generational fight as well, because, one of the things that you learn the longer you're in politics is that for a lot of people, particularly older folks, no offense, but of older generations in politics, their idea of fairness is fairness, but I need to get everything that I need. I need my interests to be met. And so, when you start talking about redistricting and gerrymandering on the Democratic side, traditionally, they're all about stopping, Republican gerrymandering. But I think that generationally, what some of us millennials and younger folks are starting to, put our foot down is saying that we believe in fairness, period. We want competitive districts. Because whatever you can game for a Democrat, you can game for a Republican when they're in power. And so I do think that that's going to be a generational fight. Last couple of questions. What does accountability look like if the court finds voters' rights were violated? What are you asking for, and what in a perfect world does this look like May 16th?
Essentially, Quinn, what that would look like for us is that this election is allowed to, go through. This election is allowed to continue. That's our ask.
Do you want them to count the votes on May 16th?
Well, Quentin, and let me tell you, man, that part is confusing the high heavens, right? Because you got people that already casted mail-in ballots who may have voted for these candidates who we're not sure, if the court rules, what happens to those votes. So I think it's even more confusing when you get to what happens May 16th. Because you already have a lot of quandaries that's attached to this that there's really no baseline for. There's nowhere we can go and research. There's no Google on this, right? So, man, that question, Clinton, Honestly, I mean, I'd be guessing if I told you. And that's the problem. Election shouldn't be a guessing game.
They shouldn't. And I will add to that by saying, what about the individuals who went in there and saw those signs that were posted and said that your vote for House of Representatives will not count? So they decided to skip over that section and they did not vote. They could have voted for me and they did. They could have voted for so and so and they did. They could have, but they didn't because that sign was posted that said that. That's why immediately on my mind was we need to file, we need to get a TRO. What about the people who aren't on social media, who haven't been paying attention to the news, who only just looked at their Go Vote app and saw that immediately upon that executive order, they removed everybody. So when they went in there, they weren't familiar with the candidates. They weren't familiar. They hadn't done everything. It just last minute. I'm not going to have to vote on that. So why bother even looking into it? And why bother even pressing a button? One of the things we said in our pleading is, and you asked about accountability, there is no monetary compensation that will account for the disenfranchisement that ultimately came as a result of all this. What accountability looks like to me is, I'm going to be honest, it's getting on the ballot, but also there needs to be consequences for those who serve in public office, who serve the people and are supposed to serve all of the people of Louisiana, whether they voted for you or not, i.e. Governor Jeff Landry is supposed to represent all of Louisiana, not just the Republicans, not just those on that side of the aisle. You're still supposed to serve everybody. Just like if I won District 5, just because I'm the Democratic candidate does not mean that I would only represent, only think about the Democratic people in my district. I want to be responsive. I want to be accountable to everybody in my district, whether that we sit on the same political aisle or not. But that for me, especially because I'm no party, I was no party prior to running in this election, there has to be accountability for those who are supposed to serve in public office and then fail in their office. They fail to uphold and they live and they operate in a way that is unbecoming of the office in which they hold. Up to and including, I'm willing, and again, saying it just plainly, accountability does not just look like this lawsuit. It looks like perhaps recall elections. It looks like holding people accountable to the fullest extent of whatever is at our availability, because there needs to be that kind of ability, of accountability. Because what has happened, the confusion that has been caused, the national attention to Louisiana once again in a negative light. Once again, there needs to be some kind of accountability that comes down as a result of this. But there is no monetary, for instance, compensation that would be able to rectify this monumental and monstrosity of a circumstance. At the very least, we wanted to get some kind of clarity on the election that's already underway. These people who absentee balloted, they know that their votes would count. These people who are going into early vote, we can remove those signs that your vote's not going to count. There is nothing more disheartening than feeling like I'm taking time off, I'm going out to early vote, I'm going in, I'm walking in, but the people that I want to vote for aren't going to be on the ballot. Because there were people who were really excited to vote for me, or really excited to vote for their particular candidate in whatever district in Louisiana, and they got circumvented. And their names, they're like, okay, I'm gonna push this button, but seeing that sign that says your vote's not gonna count.
Yeah.
There's nothing that can unring that bell right there of a generation that already feels like they don't matter, like voting doesn't matter, because that sign when they walk in literally says your vote won't count.
It creates a million different, now scenarios that are hard to be able to say are legitimate. I mean, you also may have people that just vote almost as an FU to the system when they see that sign. And even though, like, obviously we want people voting and all of that, is that how they would have voted but for having seen that sign? Is that how they would have voted but for? And so there's just a million different scenarios that you can think of why now just the chaos that Landry has created makes it so difficult to kind of wrap your head around what the May 16th result even means as a result of all of this. Last question. What do you want voters to do? What should voters do right now?
Oh yeah. Well, Quinn, first and foremost, go vote, right?
Facts. Yes.
I think the way we balance all of this stuff out is we got to get back to the polls. Because Quinn, and sometimes when you say this, people get upset about you saying it. But let's just keep it real. If we don't go to a football game and go vote, then we're not in the spot. That's just what it is, right? We got to put a priority back on voting and reaching those who don't vote. And I think, of course, when you run the campaigns, the hit campaigns, you got to focus on the chronic voters. But we have to, as a community, put more emphasis on the folks that normally don't show up to the polls. Because until we can get those people to the polls, we're going to continually have the situation that we had. Every civic organization, any community member that cares, need to be walking around, knocking doors, canvassing, getting people registered to vote. Quinn, I remember your mama, Reverend Alexis Anderson, who walked the streets of Baton Rouge for years, getting people registered to vote. Every time you saw her, it could be in Walmart. She had a voter registration application, right? She would walk up and down Government Street, up and down Florida, getting folks registered to vote. That's the kind of energy we need right now. We got to get people back to the polls.
I would second that and say the same thing. I want people no different than what I stated in the hearing behind Calvin Duncan. I do not want them to be discouraged. I do not want them to lose hope. I want them to fight with everything that they have, and act like the tree of liberty is literally on fire, and to also stop trying to negotiate with those arsonists who are currently holding the matches. Show up and show out. Show them who they work for. Remind them who they work for. My shirt literally says, "The power of the people is more powerful than the people in power." It's a quote that I have said online for the last 10 years. Because it's not even just that I genuinely believe it, but it's a sentiment that we all can relate to because we see it with our own eyes, that our current government does not represent the average American. It represents special interests. It represents big business. It represents the Epstein class. It represents those with the most money. But those are the few dictating the lives of the many. And the only way to show them and to remind them who they vote for is when you show up and you remind them who they work for. So the power of the people is more powerful than the people in power. But Frederick Douglass says that the limits of tyrants are prescribed only by the endurance of those whom they oppress. They will continue to do what they do until you demand your power back. Because in that same phrase, there is no struggle, there is no progress. You can't have the struggle without, you can't have the progress without the struggle, but power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will. You have to literally show up and you have to remind them who they work for. Otherwise, they will continue to do what they do because it's an enabling behavior. So I want the people of Louisiana to show up and vote. Vote your conscience and show up this time like they've never showed up before, especially now.
Eugene Collins, Rubia Garcia, Democratic candidate for the 5th Congressional District. Thank you all for joining me and explaining your lawsuit, and good luck on the front lines of this one.
Appreciate you. Thank you, sir.